My name is Renata Cowell. I'm 34 years old, and the night I finally understood what was happening to me, I was sitting alone in a hospital laboratory at 1:17 in the morning, staring at a mass spectrometry readout on a screen, holding a vial of my husband's tea in my hand. The results were right there, clean, unambiguous, the kind of data that doesn't negotiate with you, doesn't soften itself, doesn't leave room for maybe I'm overreacting. I had run every control I knew how to run. I had checked my methodology twice. I had done everything a good scientist does when she suspects she might be wrong and desperately wants to be. I wasn't wrong. And the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I still can't fully explain, is that I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just sat there in the quiet of that empty lab and made a list. That's who I am. That's who I've always been. And it's exactly who I needed to be that night. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this actually started, because it didn't start in that lab. It started in a kitchen with a mug of tea and a husband who knew exactly how to look like someone who loved you. Before I do that, if you found this video at some strange hour, if you're watching from your phone in the dark because something about that title wouldn't leave you alone, I want to know where you are right now. Drop your location and the time in the comments. There's something I've always found quietly comforting about knowing who else is awake. Like this video if you want to hear everything, subscribe so you don't miss a single part of this, and share it with someone who needs it. Okay, let me take you back. I grew up in Bowling Green, Kentucky, in a house where the rule was simple. Everything looks fine from the outside, and that's what matters. My dad managed a plastics plant floor. My mom kept the house the way some people keep secrets, with a kind of cheerful, airtight efficiency that left no room for mess. We weren't wealthy. We weren't struggling in a way that anyone talked about. We were the kind of family that showed up to everything on time and never told you what it cost to get there. I have one older brother, Dale. He left for the Army at 18 and sort of never came all the way back, not in the way that counted. So for most of my childhood, it was me and my parents and the unspoken agreement that feelings were something you managed quietly, the way you managed a leaky faucet. You kept it contained, you didn't make it someone else's problem, and eventually it either fixed itself or you just got used to the drip. I was 11 when my mother collapsed in our kitchen. I was the one who found her. She was on the floor by the refrigerator, and for a few seconds I just stood there in the doorway, because my brain could not reconcile what it was seeing with everything it had been taught about how this family operated. My mother did not fall down. My mother did not break. Except she had been breaking for years, silently, privately, in a way nobody had known to look for because the surface was so perfectly maintained. She had a heart condition, had it for years, never told anyone. She survived. She's still in Bowling Green, and I call her every Sunday, and I love her in the complicated way you love someone who taught you both how to endure things and how to stop asking whether you should. But that morning on the kitchen floor changed something in me that I don't think ever fully changed back. I became the kind of person who looks underneath surfaces, who trusts data over presentation, who asks the question that nobody else in the room seems to want to ask. It just took me 8 months and a toxicology report to turn that instinct on my own marriage. I put myself through college working 20 hours a week at a campus pharmacy at Western Kentucky. I started in health sciences because I wanted to be the kind of person who helps people get better, and I ended up in medical laboratory science because I fell in love with a part of medicine that doesn't guess. Lab work is honest. The result is what it is. It doesn't care what you hoped for. I graduated at 23 with honors and a modest amount of debt that I paid off methodically over 6 years. No one threw me a party. My dad said good job in the way he said most things, briefly, already looking somewhere else. My mom sent me a card with a check for $50 and a note that said she was proud of me, and I kept that note in my wallet until it fell apart. The first time I felt truly seen in my professional life, I was 26, and my supervisor at the time, a woman named Dr. Wren Calloway, who is not in this story but deserves to be mentioned, told me after a particularly complicated case that I had the rarest skill in this lab, which is the ability to follow evidence you don't want to find. I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count. I thought about it at 1:17 in the morning, staring at a toxicology screen. I thought about it when I was deciding whether to tell anyone what I'd found. I met Marcus at a medical conference in Nashville when I was 28. He was 41. He was confident in the way certain men are confident, not loudly, but thoroughly, like someone who has never seriously considered the possibility of being wrong about something. He knew what he wanted to eat before the waiter arrived. He remembered the names of everyone he'd been introduced to the night before. He called me the following Thursday exactly when he said he would. I had come out of a 4-year relationship with a man named Preston, who was warm and funny and fundamentally unable to commit to a future that included anyone other than his present self. When that ended, I grieved it quietly and completely. And then Marcus appeared with his certainty and his Thursday phone calls, and I moved faster than I ever had with anyone, because there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from loving someone who won't land anywhere. And Marcus had landed, or so I believed. We got married after 14 months, moved to Clarksville. I kept my job at the hospital. He ran his consulting work from a home office. We had a life that looked, from the outside, exactly the way a life is supposed to look. And if you've ever been in a marriage, or a relationship, or a family, or any close arrangement with another person, where you slowly started feeling wrong in a way you couldn't name, where you kept explaining away the evidence because you trusted the person more than you trusted your own body, then I need you to stay with me through this next part. Because it's not just my story. I know it's not. If that's already landing somewhere familiar for you, hit like, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. I'll keep going. The tea started about a year into the marriage. Marcus said a naturopath friend had recommended a specific herbal blend, custom made, he said, for stress and sleep support. He started making it for me every evening before bed, without being asked. He kept the blend in a small dark canister on the kitchen counter that I never thought to open. I want to be very precise about this. I didn't find it strange. Not at first. He was attentive in other ways too. He cooked more. He asked about my health regularly. He suggested I see my GP about the fatigue I'd been mentioning. All of it read as care. All of it had the surface of a husband who was paying attention. The fatigue had started maybe 2 months after the tea. Gradually, then more consistently. A heaviness that didn't fully lift in the morning. A fogginess I started calling the haze privately. Never to Marcus, because every time I mentioned feeling off, he had a gentle, reasonable explanation ready before I finished the sentence. Stress. Demanding job. Possible anemia. My GP had flagged low iron levels, and that became the official story, the one that traveled smoothly from doctor visits to dinner conversations without anyone looking any harder. I was keeping a symptom log. I want you to understand this about me. I did not start the log because I suspected Marcus. I started it because I am the kind of person who writes things down. 3 legal pads over 8 months, dated entries, symptom descriptions, duration, severity, accompanying conditions. I was treating my own body like an unresolved lab case. I just hadn't fully let myself read what the data was saying. Not yet, but something was coming that would make it impossible to look away. And I want to tell you about the Tuesday it started to crack open, because it didn't begin with a confrontation or a confession or anything loud at all. It began with a patient file I was processing at my bench on an ordinary shift, and a list of symptoms in a doctor's handwriting that stopped me so completely I had to set my work down and just breathe. The file landed on my bench at 2:14 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in October. I know the exact time because I log my case starts. It's habit, professional reflex, the same way I log everything. The requisition was routine on its face. A tox panel on a female patient, mid-40s, admitted through the ER after what the attending had described as a suspected supplement interaction. I pulled at the accompanying notes the way I always do, skimming for context before I started processing. And then I stopped skimming. The attending had written her presenting symptoms in shorthand. Fatigue, persistent, not responsive to iron supplementation. Intermittent nausea, no identified GI cause. Cognitive disruption. The patient herself had described it as thinking through fog. Peripheral tingling in the hands and feet. Elevated copper in preliminary blood work, flagged as anomalous. I sat there for a long moment. Long enough that the technician at the next bench looked over and asked if I was okay. Fine, I said, just reading. I finished processing her panel. I did my job. I was thorough, I was precise, I documented everything correctly, and then I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for 11 minutes before I could make myself drive home. Because those symptoms, every single one of them, were mine. Not similar to mine, not adjacent to mine. Mine. The fogginess, the fatigue that iron hadn't touched, the tingling in my left hand that I had mentioned to my GP once and then stopped mentioning because she had attributed it to tension and poor sleep posture. The nausea that came and went without pattern that I had started quietly timing in my third legal pad because that's what I do. I record things, I track things, I wait for the pattern to reveal itself. I had been waiting 8 months for a pattern I already had. I drove home. Marcus was in his office on a call. I could hear his voice through the closed door, the warm, assured tone he used with clients, the one that made people feel like the most competent person in the room was personally invested in their problem. I changed out of my work clothes. I made dinner. I ate across from him while he talked about a property deal in Murfreesboro, and I nodded at the right times. And I felt, for the first time, like I was the one performing. That night, I lay in bed and I did not open the third legal pad. I did not make a list. I just stared at the ceiling and let myself finish a question I had been interrupting for months. What if the T is Y? I didn't say it out loud. I didn't write it down. But I let it exist, fully, completely, without immediately explaining it away. And something in me shifted in that moment. Something that had been managing the surface of things for a very long time went very quiet. I waited 4 days. I want to be honest about those 4 days because they matter. I didn't spend them panicking. I didn't spend them confronting Marcus or searching his phone or doing any of the things a person in a movie does when suspicion first arrives. I spent them watching. Specifically, carefully, in the way I have always watched things, collecting without reacting, noting without concluding. I watched his hands when he made the tea. I watched how he positioned his body, slightly angled away from me, filling the mug at the counter, the canister retrieved from the cabinet above the stove where we kept things we didn't use every day. I had never once opened that canister. It had been on our counter for over a year, and I had never asked to see what was inside it, because he had told me once what it was, and I had believed him. And in our house, in the house I grew up in, and in the marriage I had built, you believed what people told you if the surface held together. On the 5th day, I put a specimen collection vial in my coat pocket before I left for work. It was a standard red-capped vial, the kind we use for preliminary liquid samples. I initialed the label and wrote a case number, a real one from a closed file, something that would read as routine if anyone glanced at it. I am not proud of the level of detail I went to. I am also not proud of it. I did what I knew how to do. That evening, Marcus set the mug in front of me on the kitchen island as always. "You're home early," he said. "Slow afternoon," I said. I wrapped my hands around the mug. I drank approximately a third of it, slowly, while we talked about nothing in particular. The weather, a news story, whether we needed to replace the weather stripping on the back door. And when he left the room to take a call, I poured the remaining liquid carefully, very carefully, into the vial, sealed it, and slipped it back into my coat pocket. Then I washed the mug, dried it, put it back exactly where he had placed it. I went to bed at 10. Marcus came in around 11. He kissed me on the forehead the way he always did, a specific gesture, practiced, warm, and I kept my breathing slow and even until I heard him fall asleep. Then I lay there in the dark with my eyes open and thought, I might be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I need to know. I ran the sample 3 nights later on the 3rd shift after the floor cleared. I told you I work in toxicological and chemical pathology. I want you to understand what that means in practical terms. I spend my professional life identifying substances in biological samples. Heavy metals, pharmaceutical compounds, environmental toxins. I read them the way other people read text. The mass spectrometry unit I used that night is the same unit I use every day. My hands were steady. My methodology was clean. I ran every control. I recalibrated the instrument. I ran the sample twice, and there it was. Thallium, a heavy metal, odorless, tasteless. Historically used as a rat poison before it was banned for residential use in the United States. And still accessible, still findable, for someone who knew where to look and was careful about how they looked. Its toxicity profile is insidious precisely because it mimics other things: fatigue, neuropathy, cognitive disruption, progressive organ stress. It accumulates slowly. It is, in the truest sense, something that happens to you gradually, in small amounts, over time, while you are busy explaining it away as something else. 8 months, 1 mug of tea every night, the same hands that kissed my forehead. I sat in that lab for a long time. I thought about my mother on the kitchen floor. I thought about the way she had managed her broken heart, literally her broken heart, in silence for years, because the surface of things had to hold. I thought about how I had spent my entire adult life believing I was different from her, that I had chosen precision over performance, evidence over assumption, and how I had been drinking thallium every night for 8 months and attributing it to work stress. The question I keep getting asked, since all of this became what it became, is, were you angry? And the honest answer is, not yet. Anger came later. What I felt in that lab, at 1:17 in the morning, looking at those results, was clarity. The cold, complete, almost physical sensation of a picture coming into full focus. Like when you've been looking at a blurred image and someone adjusts the lens and suddenly every edge is sharp and undeniable, and you can see exactly what you're looking at. I wasn't wrong. I printed the results. I sealed the printout in a plain manila envelope. I logged out of the system, turned off the light in the lab, and walked to my car in the empty hospital parking lot. It was 41 degrees. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment with my hands in my lap. Then I drove home, got into bed beside my husband, and slept 4 hours. Have you ever known something, really known it, the way you know things in your body before your brain has finished catching up, and had to decide what to do with that knowing before anyone else even realized you were deciding? I think about how many people are carrying exactly that right now. A result they've seen that they haven't shown anyone yet. A pattern in a legal pad that they've been telling themselves is something else. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, even the ones that are just yes, especially those. The next morning, I went to work at my usual time. I stopped at the coffee cart in the lobby the way I always did, ordered the same thing I always ordered, medium drip, no sugar, and I took the elevator to the 3rd floor and asked the front desk if Dr. Pauline Marsh had a few minutes before rounds. Pauline is my department supervisor. She has been running our lab for 11 years with the kind of authority that doesn't require volume. She is simply the most competent person in the room, always, and everyone in the building knows it. She is 52 years old. She has silver white hair and a clean bob, and wire-rimmed glasses and a small American Chemical Society pin on her lab coat lapel. She moves fast and thinks faster, and in 4 years of working under her, I have never once seen her flinch at data. She looked up when I came in. I closed the door behind me. I set the manila envelope on her desk. I didn't say anything. She picked it up, opened it, removed the printout. She read it. She removed her glasses. She read it again. The room was very quiet. "How long?" she asked. "I estimate 8 months," I said. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. She set the printout down carefully, the way you set down something that has changed the shape of the room. "Who else knows?" "You're the first person I've told." She looked at me for a long moment, not with pity, not with alarm, but with the specific expression of someone absorbing a fact and already beginning to calculate what it requires. Then she said, "You need to call someone who is not me, Renata, and you need to do it today." I nodded. "And I'm going to run a confirmation panel through proper institutional channels," she said. "With your authorization, clean chain of custody." "Yes," I said. "Are you safe going home tonight?" I thought about it honestly. "I think so. He doesn't know I know." She nodded once. "Then don't let him know you know. Not yet." I left her office and went to my bench and processed 7 routine panels before lunch, because that is what you do when you are a person who follows the data wherever it leads. You keep doing the work, even when the work has just become your life. But that evening, I did one more thing before I drove home. I sat at my work computer and pulled up the county records database. I told myself I was probably looking for nothing. I told myself I was being thorough, the way I am always thorough, the way I have been thorough since I was 11 years old, standing in a kitchen doorway, learning that the people you love most can be quietly falling apart while the surface holds perfectly together. What I found in those county records, what I found in 23 minutes of looking, was the thing that turned everything from a toxicology result into a complete, devastating picture. And I need to tell you about that. But first, I need to take a breath. Because even now, even after everything that has happened and resolved and settled into the particular kind of peace that comes from surviving something that should have broken you, finding that insurance policy is still the moment that costs me the most to revisit. I'll tell you everything. I promise. Let me keep going. I want to tell you exactly what I found, and I want to tell it to you the way I experienced it. Not all at once, not like a reveal in a movie, but piece by piece, the way the picture assembled itself on my screen in the quiet of my office while the rest of the floor had already gone home. The first thing I searched was his name against county property records. I had access to the public database through the hospital's legal compliance portal. Nothing I wasn't authorized to use, nothing I had to break into. I just had to decide to look. And I had spent 8 months not deciding to look, so when I finally did, I moved through it with the same methodical attention I bring to everything, and I told myself I was just being thorough. The property records showed the house, our house, which I knew about, and then a second listing, a co-signed commercial property investment in a mixed-use development outside Nashville. Marcus's name and another name I recognized. His brother, Greg. The property had been flagged in a civil filing. I clicked through to the associated documents. The investment had collapsed. The details took me about 10 minutes to fully piece together, cross-referencing the civil filing with a separate lien notice and a creditor correspondence that had been entered into the public record. The liability exposure, Marcus's personal share based on the cosign agreement, was approximately $340,000. The filing date on the initial default notice was 14 months ago. I sat with that number for a moment. 14 months ago. I opened a new search tab. I pulled up the State Insurance Licensing and Policy Registration Database, another public access tool, one I had honestly never had reason to use before. I typed in Marcus's name. I typed in mine. There was a life insurance policy on me, $750,000. Marcus listed as sole beneficiary. Opened 14 months ago, the same month as the default notice. The same month, within 11 days, that he had first suggested the tea. I know what it feels like to have your body understand something before your mind has finished processing it. I have felt that before, in small ways, in the lab, when a result is coming together and you know before you can articulate why. This was that feeling, but at a scale I had no framework for. It moved through me like cold water. I sat very still. I looked at the screen. I looked at the date on the insurance policy. I looked at the date on the default notice. I looked at my own name in the beneficiary field, listed as the insured. And I understood, completely, structurally, in the way that only data can make you understand something, that my husband had not made me tea every night because he loved me. He had made me tea every night because he needed $750,000, and he needed it to look like an accident. I did not go home immediately. I sat in my office for 23 minutes. I know because I checked my phone's screen time log later. I have thought about why I checked it, and I think the answer is that I needed to know how long it takes a person to absorb something like that. 23 minutes. That's how long it took me to move from understanding to deciding. I called Blythe at 8:31 p.m. Blythe Haddon has been my closest friend since we were college roommates. She is 36 years old, she lives in Nashville, she is a pediatric occupational therapist, and she is the person I call when I cannot sleep, which had been often lately, though I had not told her why. She is the kind of person who says the hard thing, but only when she is sure you are ready to hear it, and she stays in the room afterward. She has auburn hair cut short in a practical pixie she's had for a decade, and she talks with her whole body, and she is the most direct person I have ever loved. She picked up on the second ring. "I need you to come," I said. There was a pause, not a long one. "Are you hurt?" "Not the way you mean." "Where are you?" "Hospital parking lot." "I'm already getting my keys," she said, and she hung up. She pulled into the parking lot 47 minutes later in her old Subaru, still in her burgundy hoodie, car keys still in her hand when she got out. She hadn't even put them in her pocket. She sat down on the bench beside me outside the main entrance and didn't say anything right away. Just settled in next to me the way people do when they understand that presence is what's needed before words. I told her everything, not in fragments, not the way I might have told it a few months ago, circling around the edges, qualifying every observation with, "Maybe I'm wrong," and "I'm probably overreacting." I told it the way I had just spent 8 months learning to tell things, sequentially, precisely, without softening the evidence to make it easier to receive. The symptoms, the log, the patient file on Tuesday, the vial, the lab results, Pauline, the county records, the insurance policy. When I finished, Blythe was quiet for a moment, which is unusual for her. The parking lot lights were buzzing faintly above us, and somewhere across the lot a car alarm chirped once and stopped. Then she said, "You already know what you're going to do." "I do," I said. "I just needed someone to be here when I did it." She put her hand over mine on the bench. She didn't tell me she was sorry. She didn't tell me everything was going to be okay. She just said, "Then let's figure out the order." That's Blythe. That's exactly Blythe. We sat there for another hour, working through it the way you work through a methodology. What needs to happen first, what depends on what I needed to have in place before I moved. I had the lab results, both my preliminary analysis and Pauline's confirmation panel, which would be processed through proper institutional channels within 48 hours. I had the insurance policy documentation, printable from the public database. I have the financial records, the default notice, the lien, the civil filing, all public, all documented, all time-stamped. And I had 3 legal pads, 8 months of dated entries, my own body's testimony, written in my own handwriting, before I knew what it was testimony to. If you have ever had to sit down and inventory the evidence of your own near destruction, if you have ever had to look at a timeline and realize how long something was happening before you let yourself see it, then you know that it is not a clean feeling. It is not satisfying in any simple way. It is exhausting and clarifying in equal measure, and underneath both of those things there is a grief that doesn't have a clean name yet. Because I had loved Marcus. Whatever else is true, that is also true. I had loved him in the way I love things I trust, completely, without reservation, the way I trust lab results, the way I trust data. I had given him the same quality of belief I give to things that are objectively true. And he had been standing at my kitchen counter every night, filling a mug with something designed to make my body fail slowly enough that no one would think to question it. And if that sits somewhere uncomfortable for you, if you are watching this and thinking about the person in your life whose care you have accepted without examining, whose explanations you have believed because the surface held together, I want you to sit with that for just a moment. Not to frighten you, but because the most important thing I learned from all of this is that love is not a reason to stop reading the data. It never was. I went home that night. I want to be clear about this. I went home and I got into bed, and Marcus was already asleep, and I lay there in the dark and I did not confront him. I did not move differently through the house. I did not stop drinking the tea. I poured it out when he wasn't watching, rinsed the mug, set it back in its place, and I performed the surface of my marriage for 11 more days, with a precision that I think, in another life, would have made me a very good actor. Because I needed those 11 days. I needed Pauline's confirmation to come back through proper channels. I needed to meet with Sergeant Claire Finch at the Clarksville Police Department's Criminal Investigations Unit, a woman who had handled domestic cases for 11 years and who, when I walked into her office with a manila folder and 3 legal pads, looked at me for a long moment before she said a single word. I needed everything documented, verified, and handed to the right people in the right order. That is the part of this that I think surprises people the most when I tell it. They expect the story of a woman who panicked or broke down or confronted her husband in the kitchen at midnight. They expect the dramatic version. And what I did instead was the quietest, most methodical thing I have ever done in my life, which is saying something because I am a person who keeps symptom logs for fun. I prepared. The night before I went to Sergeant Finch, I sat at my kitchen table after Marcus had gone to bed, and I opened the 4th legal pad to the first page. I wrote 2 words at the top. Early enough. My physician, once I had disclosed everything and begun the chelation treatment to address the thallium accumulation in my system, had told me that the intervention had come early enough to prevent permanent damage. My liver function was stressed but not compromised beyond recovery. The peripheral neuropathy in my hands would resolve with treatment. The cognitive fogginess would lift as the levels cleared. Early enough. I underlined it twice. And I thought about the 11-year-old girl in the kitchen doorway who had learned that the people you trust can be quietly falling apart, or quietly doing something terrible, while the surface holds perfectly together. I thought about how that girl had spent her entire adult life building a mind precise enough to read the truth underneath the surface of things. And I thought, she finally used it on the thing that mattered most. I closed the legal pad, I turned off the kitchen light, and I went to bed for the last time in that house, in that marriage, with the full weight of what I knew and the full clarity of what I was about to do. And I slept, finally, without the haze, because the tea was already in the drain. And tomorrow, everything changes. I have replayed the morning I walked into Sergeant Claire Finch's office more times than I can count, not because it was dramatic, but because of how undramatic it was, how quiet, how much it looked, from the outside, like nothing more than a woman carrying a manila folder and 3 legal pads into a government building on a Wednesday morning. I wore my heather gray pullover, my navy trousers, my white sneakers lightly worn. I had my hair down. I don't know exactly why, except that I had been wearing it in its usual knot for so long that letting it down felt like something, like permission, like I was allowing myself to be fully present in what I was about to do rather than the professional, contained version of myself that keeps everything neatly in place. I had no rings on my left hand. I hadn't taken the wedding ring off in any conscious, ceremonial way. I had simply stopped putting it on 3 days earlier, and Marcus hadn't said anything about it, which told me something I filed away without comment. Sergeant Finch's office was small and very organized, the kind of organized that comes not from aesthetics but from the practical necessity of managing a high volume of complex cases without losing anything. She was 53 years old, compact and direct, with short dark hair going silver at the part, and the specific quality of stillness that I have only ever seen in people who have spent years sitting across from people in crisis and learned that their own calm is a form of service. She stood when I came in. She shook my hand. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. I sat down. I set the manila folder on the desk. I set the 3 legal pads beside it. I put my hands in my lap. I need to report an ongoing poisoning, I said. The victim is me. The substance is thallium. The delivery method is a nightly tea prepared by my husband. I have lab confirmation from my institution's toxicology department, insurance and financial records establishing motive, and 8 months of dated personal symptom documentation. Sergeant Finch looked at the materials on her desk. Then she looked at me. Did you compile all of this yourself? She asked. It's what I do, I said. The next 9 days are both the longest and shortest I have ever lived. I was not at home for most of them. I had arranged to stay with a colleague, a woman named Sandra, who lived 20 minutes from the hospital and who asked no questions beyond, "Do you need anything from the store?" I told Marcus I was covering extended shifts due to a staffing shortage, which was plausible enough that he accepted it without visible concern. Whether he believed me or was simply recalibrating, I will never know. I didn't need to know. I needed 9 days. Blythe drove up from Nashville on the 3rd day and stayed for 2 nights, sleeping on Sandra's couch, making coffee at 6 in the morning and sitting with me while I drank it before I left for work. We didn't talk about Marcus much during those 2 days. We talked about other things, her daughter, a case she was working on at the clinic, a book she'd been trying to finish for 4 months. The ordinary, ongoing texture of a life. I needed that more than I needed analysis. On the 6th day, Pauline called me into her office and handed me the institutional confirmation results. Clean chain of custody, properly logged, unimpeachable. She had also, with my authorization, flagged the case to the hospital's legal team, which meant there was now an institutional record entirely independent of anything I had compiled myself. She handed me the report. I looked at it. Then I looked at her. "How are you doing?" she asked. And the way she asked it was not the way people ask when they want a reassuring answer. It was the way she asks when she actually wants to know. "I'm okay," I said. And then, because it was Pauline and she would know if I was rounding, "I'm clearer than I've been in 8 months, and I'm very tired." She nodded. "That's an honest answer." She walked me to her office door, and just before I left, she said quietly, "You did the right thing, running it yourself first. Some people would have talked themselves out of it." "I know," I said. "I've been some people before." Marcus Cowell was arrested 9 days after I walked into Sergeant Finch's office. I was not there when it happened. I was at my bench, processing a routine panel, my hands doing what they have always done. Precise, methodical, following the sample wherever the evidence led. Sandra texted me at 10:43 a.m. "It's done." I read the message, set my phone face down on the bench, and finished the panel. Blythe called it lunch. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it honestly, the way I had learned, or relearned, or finally allowed myself to think about things. Like something that was wound very tight just stopped, I said. "That's allowed," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm just not used to it yet." He was charged with attempted poisoning in the 1st degree and insurance fraud. The evidence, my lab results, Pauline's institutional confirmation, the financial records, the insurance policy, the symptom logs, was, according to Sergeant Finch, among the most thoroughly documented self-reported cases her unit had processed. She said it with a kind of professional appreciation that I understood completely, because it is the same feeling I have when a sample comes in that has been handled correctly all the way down the chain. If you have ever done something that required you to be the most competent version of yourself at the exact moment you were the most devastated version of yourself, if you have ever had to hold both of those things at the same time and just keep working, then I want you to stop for a second and recognize that, because it is one of the hardest things a person can do, and you don't always get credit for it, because from the outside, it just looks like you're fine. Hit that like button if this story has stayed with you. Subscribe so you don't miss how this ends, because there's still more, and the part that surprised me most wasn't the arrest, it was what came after. Stay with me. What I did not expect, what nobody tells you about in the aftermath of something like this, is how much space Marcus continued to occupy in my thinking even after he was no longer in my house. No longer in my kitchen, no longer standing at my counter with his back to me, filling a mug. I want to be honest about this because I think it is the most important part, and it is the part that is hardest to say. I understood him, not in the way that excuses what he did, not in the way that softens it or makes it acceptable, or erases the 8 months of symptoms or the insurance policy, or the $340,000 that turned my marriage into a calculation. I understood him in the way you understand a lab result that you didn't want to see, clearly, completely, without the luxury of looking away. Marcus grew up in a family where failure was not an option, where the surface of things was the thing itself, where being seen to fail was worse than the failure, where the performance of success was so thoroughly maintained that losing it would mean losing everything he understood himself to be. He had failed twice before, 2 marriages, 2 public collapses of the narrative he had built around himself. And when the investment failed and the liability notice arrived and the $340,000 became a wall he couldn't see over, something in him had made a choice that I do not think he experienced as monstrous. I think he experienced it as solving a problem. I think he told himself a story about it that let him kiss my forehead at night and sleep. That is not a defense of him. It is the truth of him. And I have found, slowly and perfectly over the months since, that holding the truth of someone does not require you to hold them. You can understand a person completely and still walk away from them completely. Those 2 things can coexist. I sat with this in Sandra's guest room one evening, about 2 weeks after the arrest, eating soup she had left outside the door without knocking. I thought about the man who had stood at my kitchen counter every night for 8 months with his back to me. I thought about how thoroughly I had trusted the surface of him, and I felt, not for the first time, but more completely than before, the particular grief of loving someone who turned out to be solving a problem that happened to be your life. It is not the clean grief of losing someone to death or distance. It is the complicated grief of losing someone to the truth of who they actually were. And you don't stop loving the person you thought they were just because you now know they weren't that person. The love doesn't have somewhere to go. You just have to carry it while it slowly changes into something else. I cried for the first time that evening in Sandra's guest room with soup going cold on the nightstand. Not loudly, just for a while. Blythe had said once, years ago, that crying quietly is not the same as crying privately, that you can do it alone and still be doing it with someone, if they know. She knew. I texted her afterward. Finally cried. She texted back, "Good. How was it?" I wrote, "Overdue." She sent a single emoji, a small candle, and I don't know exactly why that was the right thing, but it was. The calls started coming in about 3 weeks after the arrest. Not from people I expected. Not from Sergeant Finch or the hospital's legal team or the prosecutor's office. Those communications came through proper channels, scheduled, professional. The calls I'm talking about came from people in the periphery of the life Marcus and I had built together. Colleagues of his, neighbors, the couple we had gone to dinner with 4 or 5 times, who I had always found pleasant in a surface-level way. They called, I think, because they needed to reconcile what they knew of Marcus with what was now public knowledge, and talking to me was a way of doing that without having to sit with the discomfort of having missed it. Most of the calls I did not answer. Some I did. I was brief, warm, and honest. "I'm doing well. Thank you for calling. Take care of yourself." What I did not do was perform my devastation for anyone's comfort. I had earned the right to be okay, and I was going to be okay on my own terms. The one call I answered fully and without reservation came from my mother. She had read something, a brief item in a regional news aggregator, vague enough to be almost unrecognizable, but specific enough that she had known immediately. She called on a Sunday morning, which is when we always talk, and she said, "I saw something. Tell me." So I told her. Everything. The full version, the one with the lab results and the legal pads and the 23 minutes in my office and Blythe on the bench and Pauline's office and Sergeant Finch and the 9 days. My mother listened without interrupting, which is not always how she listens, and when I finished, there was a long pause. "You ran the test yourself," she said. "Yes." Another pause. "I'm sorry I didn't teach you to do that sooner." Her voice was careful, the specific careful of someone saying something they have been holding for a long time. To look underneath, to trust what you find. "You taught me more than you know," I said. "It just took me a while to apply it." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Are your hands okay?" My hands. She had read enough to know about the neuropathy. And that was the thing that broke through. Not the sympathy, not the apology, but the specific, practical love of a mother asking about her daughter's hands. "Getting better," I said. "Every week, a little better." I wrote Marcus a letter about 6 weeks after the arrest. I want to be clear. I did not send it. I wrote it for myself, the way I have always written things, because writing is how I process, how I make the data legible to the part of me that isn't a scientist. I sat at the kitchen table in Sandra's house on a Tuesday evening, and I wrote 3 pages in the 4th legal pad, below the words early enough that I had underlined twice on the first page. I didn't write it to wound him, or to forgive him, or to explain myself. I wrote it to finish the thought, to put the complete picture into words, not just data. To say, "I saw you," not the surface of you, you. And I walked away not because I stopped seeing you, but because I finally saw myself clearly enough to know what I deserved. When I read it back to myself that evening, I found the line that felt most true, the one that reframed, for me, everything that had come before. Trusting someone is not the same as abandoning your own evidence. Love is not a reason to stop reading the data. It never was, and I will never again confuse the two. I read that line to Blythe over the phone later that night. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's who you've always been. You just forgot for a little while." 8 months, I said. "A little while," she said firmly. And I laughed. The real kind, the kind that surprised me. For the first time in longer than I could remember. My name is Renata Cowell. I am 34 years old. I am sitting at my own kitchen table as I tell you this, a different kitchen, a rented house 20 minutes from the hospital, with a window above the sink that gets good morning light, and a coffee maker that I chose myself, and a counter where nothing sits that I didn't put there. My hands are steadier than they were 6 months ago. The tremor is almost gone. My physician says another few months of treatment and the blood work will be clean. My hair is in its knot. My hands are wrapped around a mug of coffee, just coffee, made by me, from a bag I bought at the grocery store and opened myself. I know exactly what is in it. I think about the 11-year-old girl in the kitchen doorway sometimes. I think about what she learned that morning about surfaces and what lives underneath them. I think about how she spent the next 23 years building a mind precise enough to read the truth underneath things. And how, when it mattered most, that mind did exactly what it was built to do. She followed the data. She didn't flinch, and she got out early enough. That's the only ending I need. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I mean this genuinely, not as a script line, but as someone who has spent the last year learning what it costs to stop trusting your own evidence. Has there ever been a moment in your life where your body, or your gut, or some quiet part of your mind already knew the truth, and you talked yourself out of it because the surface of things looked fine? I think about that question a lot. I think a lot of us are carrying an answer to it that we haven't said out loud yet. Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, especially the ones that are hard to write. You don't have to share everything. Sometimes just saying yes is enough. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt like something you needed to hear, hit like, subscribe so you're here for the next one, and share it with someone who might need the reminder that their instincts are worth listening to, that the data inside them is real, that they are allowed to read it. My name is Renata. I'm 34, and I finally know what it feels like to trust myself completely. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.